Hi, I'm Dara Berger. I live in New York City and I am the author of the new book, How to Prevent Autism. It's been a long journey leading up to writing this book. My son Dylan, who is 13 years old, was diagnosed with autism when he was about 2 years old. But what I didn't know is the signs were there way before. And unfortunately, his pediatrician missed all these signs. Dylan was born a very, very healthy baby. He was born 5.5 weeks early, but he was breathing on his own. He had an APGAR of 8 and 9, which is great. He needed no assistant. That they actually sent us home 36 hours later. And he came home. He was a beautiful, happy, loving baby. And I didn't vaccinate him right away because I was very nervous. He probably got the vitamin K shot in the hospital because everybody gets that. They don't even ask you. And it was interesting when I started to vaccinate him at about 5 months old. All of a sudden, these little problems started creeping in. He was spitting up large chunks of formula, which I didn't know at the time that that is an overt sign of food allergy. He had a red face, like it looked like someone slapped him. And the pediatrician kept telling me over and over again, just to keep putting Aquaphor on it. But again, another very obvious sign of food allergy. Then he developed a yeast rash around his penis that wouldn't go away no matter how many times I put the prescription cream that the doctor gave me. And then he developed eczema. And I didn't know it at the time. A lot of people think eczema is no big deal, just use the steroid cream, even though it thins the skin over time and it doesn't really get to the root of the problem. It's a sign already that his immune system was totally off kilter. And I had no idea that adding vaccinations on top of all that was going to be a recipe for disaster. Well, unfortunately, I learned out the really hard way. I was doing a very alternative schedule with Dylan. I was that pregnant woman reading books about vaccines because somehow I had a sixth sense, that mommy intuition. I knew something didn't seem right. Why does my baby need to have all these things injected into them? And at the time, I didn't even understand that they were full with carcinogens, neurotoxins, DNA from aborted fetuses and all different animals. But I still just thought, this doesn't seem right. I didn't have this many when I was younger. So I vaccinated him on a very alternative schedule. And let me tell you, it was very hard to find a pediatrician that would allow me to do it. When Dylan was born, I went to 3 pediatricians before I actually found one that would see him. And this was 13 years ago. Now it's become much more vicious and much more difficult to find a pediatrician if you're not going to vaccinate with the CDC schedule exactly as it's laid out. So I did one every couple months, and I started to notice every time I vaccinated him, I'd be back at the pediatrician's office within a day or two. There'd be like a golf ball sized lump lymph node next to his groin. One time he was breathing funny after a Prevnar vaccine that I actually made the pediatrician. I sat behind her and I said, put vaccine reaction in his record because this doesn't seem normal to me. And she did. She put possible vaccine reaction. So I settled with that. But I took a long break from vaccines because I really was starting to notice one side of his face was asymmetrical too. It started to get much bigger. We had to go to a plastic surgeon. We had to go to a neurologist. Why was one side of his face growing? At the time, I didn't know that that was neuroinflammation. I learned out many years later. Again, missed by his pediatrician. Everything is no big deal unless your child's like dying or anaphylactic. So after 6 months, I went back to vaccinating because I was about to apply to preschools, and I thought to myself, how am I going to get into preschools when I'm so behind? I had no idea that you had the ability to write exemptions. So I started to vaccinate him again. I went and did another DTaP, but I had already done one, so I wasn't so concerned, and he was okay. I mean, kind of starting to spiral slowly, even though it was very hard to detect. But then I went in for a Hib shot, and that was not hard to detect what happened. I went into the pediatrician at 6 p.m. at night. She gave my son the shot, and I don't know why the nurse left the vial and the box on the bench. And I don't know why I decided to pick it up. and I put both of those items in my pocket. And Dylan just looked white as a ghost, like he had had a stroke right then and there in the pediatrician's office. I walked home to my house, which was like 6 blocks away, and every half block, I literally stopped. I was so nervous. I walked in front of the stroller. I just looked at him, and it's etched in my memory forever how he looked, what he was wearing. And he was still, it was like seeing a ghost. And we went home. I fed him quickly, put him to bed. And the next morning, my biggest concern after vaccines was always SIDS. I mean, I knew way back then, of course, it's so ridiculous to think that babies dying a day or two after all this junk is injected in them has anything other than to do with those vaccines, those shots. I went in the morning. Oh, I was so happy he was alive. But I didn't know until moments later he wasn't right. He wasn't making sounds. And I kind of just went about my day thinking, okay, I'm overreacting. There's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. And no, he was not fine. He never spoke again for 7 years. He couldn't make a sound. The most seasoned speech therapist said he was the most apraxic child they had ever met. And then subsequently, we did an MRI, and it showed 2 ischemic strokes. And I have to say, I thank God every day when I look at him that he didn't die that night, because he so easily could have died.